Okay, so today we are talking about student discipline and teacher anger management. And when we think about ethical violations, we typically think about the student-teacher inappropriate relationships. What we don't see often is the abuse of physical, mental, or emotional. Sometimes we do see that because everyone has a cell phone, and you're going to see some examples of that later in our presentation, but those are the ones that we're going to talk about today. These are our stimulating thinking. How does student behavior impact teacher behavior? And then how does teacher anger impact student achievement? Today we're going to explore different strategies. We're going to identify techniques that can de-escalate confrontations, and then also identify techniques that disengage challenging behavior. So, when we think of our educators' code of ethics, to protect the safety and welfare of Texas school children and school personnel, if it were only that easy. So, just a few shout outs. What do you think about when you look at this graphic? Anybody?
Behavior.
Yeah?
Employee behavior.
Our employee behavior, we have to be role models in everything that we do. Our children look up to us. I'm going to read a quick situation, a true situation that happened inside the classroom. His teacher had urged him all year to be more organized, but he still had trouble keeping his work area neat. The boys' papers and other materials were often scattered around, and when his classmates were ready to move on to the next activity, he lagged behind, trying to corral the clutter. On this particular day, the teacher had lost her patience. According to a district report, she chastised her student. Your area looks like a pigsty. Piggy, piggy, oink, oink. Exactly what happened next was difficult to pin down, but by the time another teacher entered the classroom, the boy had been surrounded by his classmates who taunted him with oinks and other pig sounds. Alone in the center, the boy was sobbing. By some accounts, his teacher, a veteran of 38 years, encouraged the children to join the chant. She told district officials she didn't notice when they began to taunt him, although she did agree it wasn't appropriate behavior. The children themselves turned out to be somewhat unreliable witnesses. They were just kindergartners. So, when you hear this real-life incident, speak with your group. What do you guys think about? Just 2 minutes, quick. Okay, so I think one thing that we hear over and over in these modules is that it is our responsibility. If we see something, we have to say something, we have to report it. Luckily, there's good news and then there's bad news. The good news, and I think we have all of these, there are great teachers who are great role models. The bad news is that there are some bad eggs out there, and we as administrators have to be on the lookout for those people. Another thing that is very lucky about CISD is that part of our DNA is relationships. Our relationships are key to making this happen. We value authentic relationships. When we invest in each other, we learn and we flourish. So again, at your tables, quickly, how do we create supportive learning environments? Our Texas Education Code wants us to adopt a discipline management program that defines what is acceptable behavior in the classroom. Here at CISD, we have 3 different things that will help us in this management system, and that is our student code of conduct, our employee handbook, and then discipline matrix. Those 3 things will help us be proactive in what we are doing inside the classroom when it comes to these behaviors. Next.
Structure is so important, and
Classroom management is something that we can definitely teach. We can't teach hard, right? So that starts with your hiring process. But when you look at classroom management, if you have a management plan, but you don't use it with fidelity, it's as if you don't have a plan at all. And so it's very important that not only each campus and each teacher have a classroom management plan, but they're actually using it every day with fidelity. Establishing those routines are so important to the social growth of our students. So let's look at this question a little bit. If having a classroom management plan is one of the primary indicators for a successful classroom, what do you think would be a secondary? What would we need second in order to promote the whole child in an educational environment? Relationships. That's so important. Also, anybody else have any to add? Engagement, that's huge. So there's different levels of engagement. We're looking for authentic engagement. And our PLC process is, part of that. So when teachers are planning, that's part of it. They have to ask what the rigor and relevance, they have to look at the rigor and relevance, what they want their students to learn. And so that's a process that's embedded in the teacher's planning, and that is so important when we look at engagement levels. Now, engagement is not going to extinguish every type of behavior, right? But it's going to help create those structures, those rituals, and those routines so that your students know the expectations and are able to follow them. And it really creates a management, an environment that's more manageable for the teacher. As Adam mentioned, being a teacher, being an educator, you are always in the spotlight and you are always a role model. And that's a very difficult thing because everything that you do, if you're out at Tom Thumb, if you are at one of the sporting events, you never know if you have a student that's watching you. They watch everything you do, everything that you say, everything that you post in some situations, right? And so you want to make sure that everything that you say is through a filter so that when we are educating our students in the classroom, we don't lose our control and say something that would impact them. We are developing not only our students academically, but we're developing those social, emotional, and behavioral skills that are going to impact them not only in your classroom, but for a lifetime. Losing control with our words or our actions is a fine line, and it's something that can impact not only ourselves, but our learners. And it can also create a very serious situation to where it can impact whether or not you're gainfully employed. So it is a serious topic. It's very important to look at the word control and to stay in control.
So this video is, if you watch this entire thing, this student antagonizes this poor lady over and over and over again, and she is done. And she clearly does not take an appropriate step.
Because you're stopping them from graduating, you idiot ass. Why you did that? Why you did that?
So we don't know what led up to this incident, but this is something that has happened very recently. And no matter what happened or what antagonized the child, and I know that hits you in the heart because we love kids and we would never put our hands on a student. And at the same time, we have to realize that we have to remind our teachers that there are different factors that come into play that can create emotions, and you have to know when to have that self-control and to back off or to turn around and let it go. I want you to turn to your table and discuss maybe what went wrong here. again, we want to talk about the aspect of control in general. When we look at our anger, when we look at different things, different experiences are part of each individual person. And something that may not be offensive to me may be offensive to Gennaro. Okay? And so we have to be mindful of our own limits and our own bias as well. I think our district has done a really good job in preparing our teachers and looking through that lens. And so I do think that that is something that is very essential in looking at how we react to different situations. So it would be unfair to say that none of us have ever gotten angry at any point. It's a very natural emotion. The key again is knowing what your triggers are and knowing your patterns so that you can be the adult in the room and stop and figure out what needs to come next. In the video that we watched, who was acting more like the child? The teacher, rather than the child. Do you think that child's going to be impacted for the rest of his life when it comes to learning? What about the classmates that witnessed that?
Yes.
In some cases, that's even more traumatic, is to watch that occur. And our kids are very intuitive. They know when someone is being sincere and when they're not. So this is just a reminder that we want to implement a classroom management plan. So implementing a classroom management plan, creating those authentic student engagement activities, those assist with the structure as well, and then modeling positive behavior, having those positive behavior incentives built into your classroom system is very, very important, PBIS. So in your group, let's talk about those three aspects. Which one do you think is most difficult for teachers to implement? Would it be the classroom management plan, the authentic engagement pieces, or would it be modeling positive behavior? Which one do you think is most difficult for teachers to implement? We all like to know what's expected of us. Think about you sitting here in this training right now. If we decided that we wanted one of you to start presenting and I came and gave Ashley the clicker, she would probably not like that. So the expectation is that we are implementing the training for you. But we don't want to put people on the spot. And a lot of times we do that without even knowing that we're doing that when we're working through different learning activities with our kids. So we just want to be sensitive to that and mindful. Loss of control can occur very, very quickly. A student or a teacher can go from 0 to 10 with just a couple of interactions, right? So it's so important that we use different techniques. CPI is a de-escalating technique. A lot of times when we think of CPI, we think of restraining a student. That's really only one teeny tiny piece of CPI. It's actually the de-escalation piece and the supporting and the structure of the student within that environment. So we do have some wonderful trainers that can help if you have a teacher that you feel like needs just additional de-escalation techniques. They're at table 2 over here. So we're going to watch another video. This is a middle school video, and this is a situation that could occur at any time and with any person. So we're going to watch this video. So it came off as her kind of venting and being upset and unfocused, whereas the other teachers were trying to focus on the learning standards. How could they have better supported her?
Well, it's not new behavior, so hopefully the administrators have been doing walkthroughs and in the classroom and provided feedback and strategies and input for her and having frequent visits.
We talked about too, they probably need to be the ones to come to administration for help, because that teacher's not going to. And that, when they're in that place, in that space, they're in front of us, they're gonna try to keep it together and it seems as though they're doing okay, but their teammates really need to be the ones to bring it to our attention and help support.
Right.
If we don't, like Cynthia said, if we don't have firsthand knowledge or we haven't seen it personally, because when we come through, sometimes they're not, you know, they are able to hold it together, but they could have done that for us.
To be at the risk of, having an unpopular answer, Parker. That incident didn't happen in isolation, that they didn't wake up on, September 15th and decide they were gonna act that way. So there would have been signs, there would have been some subtle cries for help. As an administrator, a class that acts that way, that they don't just all decide one day that they're gonna do that. So I feel like there are pieces to that as a, we're talking about collaborative teams. Yes, they should have been talking about the standard at that same time when you have a colleague that frustrated and that angry. Someone has to take the empathetic step and say, okay, what's going on? How can we help you? Because to be at that frustration level, you have to believe that our educators don't come in already that angry and already that resentful of what they do for a living. So something happened. What are the pieces that led up to that, and how can we help support them as colleagues and as administrators? I feel like that's the one thing, to take someone's probably worst day and say, oh, it just happened here. What were the signs? And we have to kind of help one another identify that.
So that situation may have other repercussions as well. So the students, you have the students to look at and to think through in the way that they were spoken to, in the way that she broke some trust, she broke some relationships, but also career-wise, her career may take a different turn at this point. It's a very, very serious situation. And so in 11 to 15 seconds, many things changed for a lot of different lives in that classroom. And so it is important to do those walkthroughs and to be in the hallways and to be in the classrooms, just to know and understand the nature of each staff member that we have, so that we can be supportive. And as educators, we also have to practice consistently how to react when we are in that anger cycle, because we are human. And so we have to also give ourselves a little bit of grace to have those emotions and experience them. And at the same time, we have to be the adult and the responsible party in the room and know how to control that. So there are a couple of slides that are going to walk through some behavior management, some anger management techniques with you. So counting, this just gives you think time. This gives you wait time instead of, coming back with a sarcastic remark or a remark that might not be appropriate for our students. Managing our negative thoughts is very, very important, and a lot of times we can counteract those with a positive thought. It's very hard to do when you're in that heated moment as well. Consider the facts of the situation. Remove it from being personal. Instead of taking it as a personal attack, remove that and just look at the facts, look at the bare minimum, so that you can calm your anger and your reactions. Effective listening is very important. It's not being assertive, or it's being assertive and not aggressive. So once we become aggressive, we're only worried about winning. And when we're worried about winning, everybody loses. So let's make sure that we are listening and doing less talking, listening and quieting our negative emotions and thoughts as well. Another aspect of working with students is power struggles. Who wins when there's a power struggle?
No one.
No one. And they are exhausting. So commonly when we get into a power struggle, avoiding them is ideal. Not getting into a power struggle. Sometimes you have those kiddos who are very witty and will try to pigeonhole you into a power struggle. So if you were to get in, you know who I'm talking about, right? You may have been that kid in the classroom. So you have to know the difference between de-escalating behavior and disengaging with the behavior. So you want to make sure that you're able to either de-escalate or withdraw and release, which would be disengaging. And Ro's going to give you some pointers on those aspects.
So the main objective that we all should remember when faced with a defiant or violent student's behavior is to remain calm, or at least outwardly. And then try to help that student remain calm as well. Quickly assess the situation and determine whether or not de-escalation is even possible, or if we need to call for immediate assistance. As educators, we are all aware that we're not going to only use de-escalation tactics with our kids that are identified as ED or who may require a bit, because probably more often than not, our general ed population of students will have some type of agitation that's triggered by a situation. So for one kid, it could be in his third period class. There's 2 kids who sit in the back of the room, and for the past few weeks, they've been throwing spitballs at him and harassing him. And today's the day that he just kind of blows up and addresses it. For another kid, it could be perceived mistreatment by her teacher, or the cafeteria worker, or the librarian, or the DLC that's helping in her class. And then there's also outside stressors that the kids are dealing with as well. I believe it was my second year at Victory Place. There was a kiddo that was sent to the Compass program for making a poor choice. He got caught and he was sent to our program. And other than that, he was a really nice kid. Our staff enjoyed him. He was compliant, well-mannered, respectful. We just really thought he was a nice kid. We sent him on the Compass bus that Friday. All was well. He returned Monday morning a totally different student. It wasn't even midday, and the Compass staff had kind of sought me out and was like, Ro, you got to talk to this kid because he has pretty much lost his day. He's being rude, he's angry, he's being disrespectful, he's not doing anything that we asked. So I go and get his sheet to kind of see specifically what were some of the deductions. And I went and got the young man and we were talking, and he knew it was immediately about his behavior for the past few hours. And so he let me know he could care less about, him losing the point. And so I asked him, like, you're struggling today, what's going on? Because this is totally out of character. And he just kind of sat there and just, whatever. And then I thought, well, perhaps something happened on the Compass bus. Maybe he got into it with another Compass kid. That wasn't it. And something told me to ask this young man about his weekend. And as soon as I asked him, he became emotional. Well, that Saturday, his father came home intoxicated, started beating up mom. He jumped in to help mom. The police were called. His father was taken to jail, and he and mom and his younger sibling had to pack up some clothes. And so he was currently staying with a relative. And that's just one example. I know as a collective group of educators, we all have similar stories that we could share from our experiences. So we're going to just briefly cover some of the basics of de-escalation. So it's important that we remind our staff to avoid questioning the student. For example, some teachers will force their students to explain that misbehavior. And think about it, it's the audience of their peers. You may get that student who's like, oh, it's showtime. I'm going to tell you my thoughts into why I'm kind of misbehaving, right? And you may have another student who may just choose to ignore the question. But that could further frustrate the teacher, but it also could escalate that anger and resentment that the student is possibly feeling. Also avoid arguing with the student, because it could then create a situation where they now think that they're on equal grounds with you, which could then lead to an altercation. A power struggle can be avoided if the staff member chooses to not partake in it, because it takes 2 people for there to be a conflict. When I first started out teaching, brand spanking new, I was observing a classroom, and there was a teacher and the teacher's aide. And at some point, the teacher had given instructions for the students, and they're working at their desk. One student decided he wanted to be disruptive, so he's making noises and just goofing off. The teacher looks at him and he's like, hey, knock it off. The kid stopped for a bit, and then he continued again. I remember the teacher just kind of glaring at him at this point, right? Kind of stopped for a bit, started up. Now, his friends around him, they're laughing and giggling, and remember them kind of whispering things at him. So he continues with it. The teacher yells out at him, shut up! Well, now the class is just laughing. The teacher gets up, walks to the student's desk very aggressively, looks down, and use you as an example, looks down at the student and tells him, I will kick your double hockey sticks, right? He left off the hockey sticks, all right? He said the whole thing, right? Do you think the kid backed down? No, that actually upset the kid. That's what the kid did. The kid stood up, and this teacher and the student are both cursing each other out. I am just kind of in disbelief, because remember, this is, first year kind of getting into this. At some point, it got so heated, the teacher put his hand, squared off I'm from the inner city, we call that squared off, or put his dukes out, okay, to fight the kid. Yes, the assistant had to go and get the teacher kind of by the neck to drag him out of the classroom. And the entire time, the teacher was still cursing the student out. And I'm looking at some of y'all's faces. I shared this story. I guarantee you, because this is like 18, 19 years ago, and we didn't have the cell phones the way we have it now, where every kid probably has one. So I'm pretty sure that's probably how horrified my face was. And I'm thinking, brand new to this, oh, this is what we're doing in education now? Like, this is how teachers are behaving? Because I can't catch no case over, a student. And I'm thinking, if all the kids had cell phones back then, what would they have been doing? Recording. And I guarantee you that would have made the news that evening, or been on a training video like the one that Jennifer just showed us. So we want to make sure we avoid raising our voices, intimidating students, and then also avoid using phrases that can escalate the problem. Why are you always acting stupid in my class? Or I demand that you sit down. We want to be mindful of that as well. Here are some additional things. Do not block escape passages. Think about some of the students when they're agitated and angry. That fight or flight response comes in, and we don't want anyone injured because a kid's trying to, run out the door. Show accepting body language, so maybe standing at an angle, in a non-confrontational stance, just remembering that CPI training as well. And then never place your hands on a student, unless you're having to do a restraint that you guys have discussed as a team, that this is the next step. Keep appropriate personal space, providing reassurance, and again, depending on the situation, it could be something simple as going to Jennifer and say, you know what, sweetheart, you're not in trouble, but let's find a way to try to turn this situation into a positive one. And then also being aware of cultural differences. Now, when we're talking about disengaging, challenging behaviors, remember again what disengage means: to withdraw, to release, so that we can stop that behavior. And these tactics pretty much just allows us to keep our calm and remain professional during the situation. But in no way is it saying that you approve of the misbehavior and you're accepting that without consequences. One of the dean of students that I used to work with would often tell us, in addition to students, there's going to be times where you're having to disengage from parents. And she would I'm seeing a lot of head nods. She would always say lower and slower, She would always remember, hey, I need to keep my job. And if I have a parent coming in here and they're acting irate and irrational, that she would speak lower and slower. And my 18 years in education, I have on occasion had to do a little lower or slower as well. So here are a few disengaging behavior strategies. keeping cool to avoid that power struggle, responding in a neutral and calm tone, keep the dialogue brief, and then use non-confrontational words. Does anyone have anything to add? Are there any strategies that you use that you feel like have been successful throughout your career that you want to share? Is this pretty much kind of what everybody will use on occasion? Okay.
Watch your body language.
Watch your body language.
That's true.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Here are some examples of what they call interrupting tactics. And these are just well-timed supportive techniques that could interrupt the escalation of a student's anger. So diverting the student's attention to a more positive topic, and again, depending on the level of defiance, if it's low level, perhaps engaging the student in a high interest group, or just saying, hey, you know what, for the next 15 minutes, why don't you come over here and finish playing Prodigy? Provide an opportunity for the student to cool down. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes. Go over here to our reading station so that you can kind of recenter and get your thoughts together, and then we'll meet and we'll discuss what it was that got you so upset. Offering the student a path to saving face, and then removal from the classroom for a brief time may also be helpful. Here's the warning, and the most important question to ask yourself. Does this situation pose a safety risk to you or your students? Because if the answer is yes, then you need to seek immediate assistance. Losing control. What are the consequences when staff members lose control of their anger? Because it can be quite serious and severe. Are you guys familiar with what happened in Brooklyn last month with the teacher? I see some head shakes. There was an elementary teacher in Brooklyn who was arrested this past December for kicking a 12-year-old in the chest and actually sending the student to the hospital. And it was simply because he lost his temper. And one thing that HR wanted me to remind you guys of, that here in CISD, TEA is notified immediately if they are having to investigate something similar. That staff member is placed on admin leave, a full investigation is conducted, and then depending on the outcome of the investigation, it could be reported to TEA as educator misconduct. Here's the definition of abuse defined by TEA. Mental or emotional, causing some type of physical injury, sexual conduct. And then here are sanctions that can be placed against your certification: restrictions, suspension, and in addition to this, termination, possibly a lawsuit, and then also maybe some type of criminal repercussion as well, depending on what the situation is.